Okay, hey there. Here we are. We are on video number 5 of our home buyer video series process, where we go through step by step and walk you through the entire home buyer video series or entire home buyer process. So this one specifically is about negotiating that purchase contract with the buyer or seller. So we've talked all the way up through looking at houses, that whole process. Once you find a house that you're going to like and like enough that you're going to write an offer on it, you need to sit down with your agent and kind of go through this process. That's what we're going to talk about. First of all, you should have already kind of discussed what that house is worth. You should have already discussed what your budget is, where you want to fall, price wise. So all of that is in the previous videos. This is strictly for the negotiation process. So there are a couple terms that are the most important things that you're going to be negotiating here. So obviously the purchase price, earnest money deposit is one of those things you are going to negotiate. Your down payment, you need to know what kind of financing needs to go in that purchase contract so the seller knows what kind of financing you're getting. Closing date, what title company you want to use, when you're going to get occupancy of the house. Is it at closing? Is it after closing? And then any of the contingencies that you're going to have to negotiate during that process. So first of all, like I said, number one is that purchase price. What do you want to get that house for? What's the end purchase price? This is a discussion you really need to have with your agent right up front. Don't wait till the last minute to have this, okay? Don't put that offer in with your agent not knowing where you want to end up. Obviously, you've got to build a strategy around how you're going to get to where you want to be, okay? You're not just throwing out numbers and hope you get there. If you build a strategy around where you're going to start, where you want to end up, chances of you ending up where you want to be are a lot higher. So sit down with your agent, discuss what your final purchase price you would really like it to be and what you would settle for. And then you can work backwards from there with your agent on where to start. And that will be in conjunction with the comps in the neighborhood. So that's the first thing you're going to obviously negotiate is the purchase price. Earnest money is the second thing. Earnest money is like a good faith deposit. We've talked about this a little bit. The more earnest money that you're willing to put down, the more serious the seller thinks you are when it comes to buying their home. If you're just going to put down a couple $100 of earnest money, it's pretty easy to walk away from that earnest money. If you're going to put down 1% or 2% or 3% of that purchase price, the seller knows that the chances of you backing out are a lot less because you've put more earnest money down that you are at risk of losing should you back out without doing it through one of the contingencies that are in that contract. So earnest money here in Ohio is different than what most people think that it is. Your earnest money, no matter why you back out of a house, a contract on a house, has to be agreed upon by both the buyer and the seller before it's dispersed. Doesn't matter why you back out. Buyer and seller have to agree. That's how it's dispersed. If they don't agree, it can go to arbitration, it can go to court. If it doesn't do any of those things, it'll sit in that earnest money account for 2 years. After 2 years, the buyer will get it back. So that's a brief summary of how earnest money works. But in the negotiation process, the more you put down earnest money wise, the more serious you will be to your seller, okay? So that's earnest money. The next thing that we're going to talk about is what type of loan you're going to have. Depending on the property, FHA, VA loans are a little bit harder to get through than what a conventional loan is. There's more requirements that might have to be followed if you are using a VA or an FHA loan. A lot of times the seller's going to look at that as you're not putting as much money down. In reality, sometimes we get people that are getting FHA loans that are putting 20% down or more sometimes. It just kind of depends. So you need to consider what type of loan you're getting and according to the house and how that's going to fit. If the house isn't in the best shape and you're trying to remodel something, a VA loan or an FHA loan may not work. So keep that in mind, the loan type that you are going to do. Okay. After that, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about home inspection. So we have different types of home inspections here. We have the full inspection. We have a limited inspection. We have during an inspection for your informational purposes only, where you're going to do the inspection, but you're not going to use it as a reason to back out. You just want to know what you're getting into, and there's no inspection at all. You have those four options. We will advise you on which option we think you should do, but ultimately that is up to you. Obviously, one of the biggest concerns for a seller is that a buyer is going to put a house under contract, take it off the market, and then use that home inspection as a way to negotiate the price down. That is not what a home inspection is for. And if your agent is telling you to do that, your agent is misinforming you. That is not what that is for. That home inspection is there to find the problems with the house that you did not know about, and then see if you can work through that. Okay. I tell our buyers and sellers that home inspections are for major issues and major costs. We're not looking to nitpick a buyer or seller on a home inspection. That's part of being a homeowner. Okay. That being said, your agent will look through that home inspection with you and go over that during that after the inspection happens. But the more thorough home inspection you do, the more concern a seller is going to have. So I'm not going to advise you to not do a home inspection. That is totally up to you. In fact, I am going to advise you to do one. But we do have sellers or buyers that choose to not do home inspections from time to time for whatever reason. I'll be glad to get into that in another video. This is not the place or the time for it. Just know that when it comes to negotiating your purchase contract, you have options on what type of home inspection that you would like to do. Your down payment and your financing, we already talked about your loan type. Down payment is another thing that home sellers are going to look at. Are they putting no money down? Are they putting 3% down? Are they putting 5%, 20%, 40%? It's up to you as a buyer how much you want to put down. The more you are putting down, the better the seller is going to feel about it. Okay. That being said, if you are buying a property and you want to put less money down because you're going to use some of your funds to remodel the property, you need to tell your agent that so we can work through that with the seller and the seller's agent so they understand that while you're only putting a little bit down, you do have extra money. That will alleviate some of their concerns most of the time. So next is closing date. Here in the state of Ohio, at least in Southwest Ohio, an average closing date is going to be 30 to 45 days, maybe up to 60. So you need to decide when you want to close between 30 and 60 days. We will have a conversation with your loan officer and find out if you can close quicker, if it's going to take longer, earlier in the process. So we'll have an idea of what you can do, but you're going to have to decide what day you want to close, okay? That's the closing date. The way the contract reads is you will close on or before whatever date is in the contract as agreed upon by both parties. So if it is December 31st, you are closing on December 31st unless you and the seller agree to close a different day, okay? In addition to the closing date, you're going to have to pick the occupancy date. Are you going to want to take occupancy of the house at the time of closing? So you go to the closing table, you sit down, you sign all your papers, and they give you the keys to the house and you can move in right away. Or do you want to give the seller a few days after closing? That's called post-occupancy. That usually will make your offer seem more appealing than one where the occupancy is at closing. That's going to tell the seller that, listen, if something happens a couple days before the closing and it has to be extended, I'm not sitting there with my entire house packed up in a truck, okay? So your agent should be able to tell you and explain to you the pros and the cons to occupancy at closing, occupancy a couple days after closing, because there are pros and cons with both. But that is something that you will need to put in your initial offer, and you will need to plan ahead for that once it's accepted, because that's what's going to happen unless you and the seller agree otherwise, right? There are a couple contingencies. There's the inspection contingency we talked about. There is the appraisal contingency. If you are getting a loan, your bank is going to do an appraisal on the property and make sure that they don't feel that you are overpaying for that property. So they're going to send an appraiser out and go through and look at comps. That's a whole separate conversation. There are some contingencies for insurance, some contingencies to read HOA docs. So your agent should explain to you what each one of those contingencies are and when they need to be satisfied throughout that process. So you can go in there and put everything in the offer up front before you send it. So then it's all negotiated all at the same time. Okay. The only other thing that you'll need to put in there is appliances. Are you asking for all the appliances to stay? The washer and dryer? Is there any personal property? We try not to get involved in personal property. Banks don't like to see it, but sometimes it does happen in certain scenarios. And then a response. Like when we send an offer, how long do we want a response from the seller? How long are we going to give them to think about it? The longer you give them, the more time they have to maybe pull another offer in. But if you don't give them enough time, they're never going to be able to have that conversation with their spouse or their significant other, whoever, around whether that's something they want to accept or counter. So you got to play a game of give them enough time, but not too much. And your agent should have an idea of what that time frame should be. So that is kind of the negotiation process in a nutshell, okay? You're going to have to lean closely on your realtor for this. So the more experience that your realtor has negotiating contracts, the better off you are going to be as a buyer or a seller 100%. If your realtor negotiates a contract a week or more, they're going to be really good at it. They're going to know what buyers and sellers are expecting, what they're looking for, what they're going to try and get. If you're working with a realtor that does not negotiate contracts nearly as often, they're not going to have as much of an idea of what to expect, what's going on in the market. So keep that in mind when you decide to pick a realtor to work with. And then the only other thing is watch when you're looking at closing dates, watch for holidays and weekends. Make sure you're not trying to close on a weekend or a holiday where banks are closed or title companies are closed. That's all part of this. So if you have any questions about the negotiation process and writing an offer, feel free to reach out to us. That's why we're here. We're here to answer all of those questions for you. And we can't wait to see you in the next video.